ISIS, the most modern genocidal group of radicals in our time. What can be said about them? A group that seems to have sprung up out of nowhere, and yet has made the entire world not forget them. Who are they? Why are they here? What do they want? Where did they come from? In this episode, we will be unmasking the truth behind the simple, recent answers of the media, and in suit will reveal to you the reason for the world's darkest hours of modern history. The reason for Islamic State. Syria, known also as the Levant. It has been a home for 22.5 million residents. That is, before the Syrian civil war erupted on March 15th of 2011. Its war-ravaged lands have displaced more than 6.5 million people, with around 3 million seeking asylum elsewhere. Nearly 600,000 have since passed in the conflict, and I'm sure most of us are aware of the issue, but not the origins of its turmoil and the far greater implications it has for the world. Many say Syria has all the right credentials for spilling out into a world war. And frankly, I have to agree. So how did all of this start anyways? In our last video, I spoke on the roots of ISIS, which was basically just another branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that after its defeat during the surge, had found a more prosperous opportunity across its border. That opportunity is what I'll be speaking on in this episode. Let's begin. Under the leadership of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, AQI, or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was responsible for some of the more brutal attacks in the country. However, after his death in 2006, the group combined itself with several smaller extremist groups and renamed its title as ISI, Islamic State of Iraq. And they seemed very generous to the people of Iraq until their true colors emerged and the support was lost among the Sunni people. This commenced the surge, and as such, they sought roots in another state, Syria. The tactics and ambitions of ISI were considered even too brutal and extreme for even mainstream Al-Qaeda, and the two went separate paths. Now with this being done, the Syrian front had much to be sought after, and multiple factions were to be defeated if ISI had any hope of being supreme in the region. But let's take a step back for a moment, and pick up where we left off, the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring began in December of 2010 and ran until December of 2012, involving Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Morocco, Jordan, Palestinian territories, Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, Sudan, and other Arab countries. The revolts had varying results in each country, however the causes were not so indifferent, ranging from corruption, poverty, economic instability, and rampant authoritarianism. But the focus of this topic today is Syria in particular. The Syrian civil war began as many of the other Arab countries had been, as demonstrations. These demonstrations in particular were for the removal of Shia dictator President Bashar al-Assad, whose corruption and family had been in power since 1971. Soon, the refusal of abdicating his presidency invoked widespread conflict by rebel forces, being mostly secular militants at first, until eventually they became too run down and the jihadists filled the gaps. With the stage set for ISI, they made their move into Syria. With their presence now entrenched in the Syrian revolution, the AQI/ISI presence in Iraq was re-emerging, as US forces were withdrawing from the region, and anger being inflamed among the Sunnis by the then Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and his repression of them. Within Syria, however, groups such as the Islamic Front, an alliance of local Islamist rebel groups, and al-Nusra Front, a network aligned with the central faction of Al-Qaeda, were making their rounds within the region, as well as those loyal to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Baghdadi, in April of 2013, announced his intention to combine his forces in Iraq and Syria with the Nusra Front under the name Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The merger was rejected, which split the two into competition, especially in recruits, and eventually led them to just hugging it out. Yeah, right. with what grew out of this whole endeavor is a result that is nothing new in the Islamic world: interreligious fighting, just in this case, two Sunni factions of the same cloth. ISIS had achieved the ambitious dreams that Al-Qaeda could have never had, and they achieved it well, spanning far past the ideology of what any other faction had in their sights or recent goals, and not only keeping to one front or another, but combining two nations into one mass blob that saw no borders, creating their own Islamic State. After taking what was made their stronghold and eventually capital city, al-Raqqa in Syria, from there they launched attacks throughout other parts of Syria and back into Iraq. At this point, they were strong enough to create a real problem for the world, and on June 29, 2014, had declared something no one in the jihadist movement had: a new caliphate. But what is a caliphate? And who is this caliphate? Why so many missing pieces? I'm afraid that will have to wait till next time.